Hi folks, in this video I'm going to defend another answer to the question, what is existentialism? In the previous video we looked at the answer, existentialism is the reflection on the human condition, and in that sense existentialism goes back all the way to the early stages of human civilization, or as far back as humans go. People have always wondered, why am I here? What am I doing? What gives my life significance? But existentialism as a philosophical school means something more specific. And it's actually that more specific thing that we're going to focus on in this class. So there's another answer to the question, what is existentialism? And because it arises in this more specific sense at a different time in history. You see, if we look at this timeline here, ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, this is when the Epic of Gilgamesh and the debate between a man and his soul occurred. And these are some of the earliest recording bits we have of human civilization. Those texts give us, that was the first answer to existentialism. Or when we looked at passages from the Old Testament in Christianity or Judaism or Islam, or Socrates and Greek philosophy, or on the other side of the globe in the Buddhist tradition, various answers as to what is the meaning of the human condition. All of those issues address the first question, the sense of existentialism as just reflections on what gives our lives meaning and significance and how to live authentically. But existentialism as a philosophical school actually arises in the European philosophical tradition at a specific point in time, and it asks questions about the human condition in a very specific way. And I want to give you a sense about how history evolved so that we came to that point. So let's think about the history of the Western tradition, like ancient Greece and Rome. This is, around the turn of the millennium. This is like around the time of Jesus in the Western tradition. And we have so that's around, 0 BCE or 0 CE. After that, we have the Roman tradition going for several hundred years. We have Constantine, like 300 CE, 300 years in the Common Era, when the Roman Empire converted to Christianity. We then have the end of the Roman Empire and the sort of descent into the Dark Ages in Europe in the middle of the first century. Then finally around 1000 Common Era in Europe, we have what's called the medieval period. So this is when the early Europeans, or the origins of the European states, started to coalesce into different kingdoms and empires, but still nothing like modern nation states today. And in this period, so what is the guiding source of meaning for Europeans in this period? All throughout the Dark Ages, or the medieval period, all the way up through Dante. Well, in order to think about that, you have to understand something about the history of religion in Europe. So this is what I want you to do to make this lecture active and to think about how it matters to you personally. I want you to pause your videos for a minute and ask this question, or try to answer this. What does religion mean to you? If you had to sum up in a few words what you think about religion, or the force of religion on humans and human history, what do you think about it? So pause your videos for 1 second. Okay, that was the last chance to pause your videos. So how you answer that question really probably depends on how religious you are. So you might think religion provides the fundamental source of meaning for each of us, and it guides your life decisions. Or you might think, religion is a bunch of falsehoods, and it's fundamentally misleading. And what it does is it's an impediment to science or to the progression of human civilization. So whichever side you come down on that answer, you have to understand that there was no two positions at the time of Dante. So Dante has this fantastic work, The Divine Comedy, and the first book of it starts out with this line: in the middle of life's journey, I found myself in a dark wood. The metaphor here is each of us as individuals is on this story. We're on a journey through life. And what that journey involves is an engagement with temptation. So the divine order of there being goodness and evil and sin, and how do we figure out how we fall in that divine order? That's what gives our lives meaning in this medieval Christian period. So if you're living in Dante's universe, there is no secular answer. The religion is going to give you the structure of your life's significance, and it does so in a particular way. And this is really a fundamental Christian way about the story of temptation and redemption. So for Dante, we actually have these various circles of hell, and to be a human means to engage with these different types of temptations and avoid all of these deprivations, and confront the sinful nature which we have inside of us. If we can do that, then eventually, so we're going to go down through all of these levels. Eventually, if we get down to the bottom of it, we encounter this satanic figure. So the final temptations, if we can avoid the temptations of Satan, Satan is like, I think of him in Dante's universe as like the boss mob who you have to then confront after going through all the other circles of hell. You finally have to confront and get past Satan. If you can do that, then you actually end up on the other side. Instead of being in heaven, though, this is where you are. You just emerge at the bottom of this mountain, and then you got to climb up all of these levels and survive in purgatory until finally, if you can do all of those things, journey all the way through hell, get past Satan, climb the entire mountain of purgatory, then you might finally get to paradise at the end of the story. So we have this hierarchy of lower and upper, this this spatial metaphor for evil and goodness. This orders the decisions, the choices you have to make in your own life, and it also orders all of human civilization. So in Dante's Europe, the religion was all encompassing. It ordered the kings and queens were divinely chosen. And human civilization, what job you had. We had no mobility in our lives. There was a kind of structure and order to society, and it was divinely ordained. And that's what gave all of our lives purpose. That's what gave us our roles, what kind of jobs we had. That meant whether we were the plebs or the serfs, or whether we were the aristocrats and the kings and the queens. Religion was all significant and all encompassing. It also meant something not just about me and my role in society, it meant something about humans' role in nature. In fact, the conception of the earth at this time was, the earth is at the center of the universe. The whole world is organized as humans matter. We are God's special creation, created in his image, and the universe was made for us to be our home. And so we are, metaphorically speaking, we are at the center of everything. We are of great import. That is the conception of human life that religion gives for us. So in some ways, Dante's Christian conception of the universe and of human significance is a deeply existential position. It's one vision of what gives humans meaning in their lives, and what our role is in nature, and how to understand ourselves, our societies, and the universe all at the same time. So this is a type of existentialist position in the first sense, in the sense we were talking about last time. And this goes all the way up until Dante was just before the 1500s. So this is really like, it's an amazing story. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend The Divine Comedy. And it is a deeply existential work in the ways in which Gilgamesh and the Egyptian debate are fascinating, wonderful, deeply existential works. But something else happens in Europe right around this time, around 1500. I'm curious if you know what happens next. I'll just give you the answer. What happens next is the scientific revolution. European civilization changes fundamentally with the invention of modern science. And this creates a seismic shift. And in many ways, the culture that we live in today in the West and in America is heavily influenced by this moment, what happens right after Dante. Because with the scientific revolution, with Galileo, Newton, Copernicus, we have a different conception of the universe. It's not the one at which the earth is at the center of the universe. And God created the entire universe to be around us, with us as the pride of place, as the most important thing. Instead, we have a different conception where the universe is just this void. We are a planet spinning around in the endless void. Earth is no more special than, and our sun is no more special. We're just orbiting the sun. We're not so important. The sun is actually at the center of our solar system, but our solar system isn't even the center of the universe. Our sun is no more important than any other star in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way is no more important than any other galaxy out there in the universe. And in many ways, existentialism as a philosophical position in this is the second answer to the question. As a philosophical school, that's what when people call the existentialists, like Sartre and Camus and many of the characters, Heidegger, folks you might have heard of as existentialists, it's their reflections on the nature of the human condition in light of the scientific revolution and what that means for the human condition. This is more specifically what we're going to focus on in this class, because we're not at the center of the universe like Dante thought. Here's my neat little graphic. See, we are just fading away into nothingness until really the universe is like this. You can't even tell where we are. The universe is fundamentally alien to us. It is not made so that we can find significance in our lives. We are just a speck, a meaningless speck out there in the middle of nothingness, soon to die and have no deeper significance to our human lives. That's another way. That's a very different way of thinking about the human condition. And it's this crisis in meaning, in light of the fact that with this secular scientific conception of the universe, it's hard to give and understand how human lives could have meaning anymore. That's really that's the fundamental historical context in which the modern existentialist thinkers are writing. Now, that doesn't mean all of them are atheists. In fact, we're going to focus on 4 existentialist philosophers in this class. So we're going to look at Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Beauvoir. And I chose those 4 because they are my 4 favorite existentialists from this period. And 2 of them are Christian and 2 of them are atheists. So we're going to get fundamentally different views from these philosophers, and they're not all going to say that human life is meaningless, but what they're all going to be is they're going to be very different than Dante's conception. Because in Dante's time, before the scientific revolution, there was no questioning, there was no way you could be a secular atheist, because there was no secular society. There was no structure to society outside of that divinely given one, outside of the aristocratic kings and queens and serfs and plebs social organization. Now, the way we think about it today is fundamentally different, regardless of whether you're religious. So in secular society, there are ways in which people are plagued by anxiety and doubt, but it's very different than the kind of doubt that Dante could have even been engaged with. When Dante has doubt, it was about being sinful. It was not finding your true good side to yourself. But when somebody like Thoreau writes hundreds of years later that we lead these lives of quiet desperation, this isn't because I'm being tempted by sin. It's because the human condition itself has a kind of meaninglessness that religion can't possibly provide. Or when Hobbes, another atheist, writes that actually what it means to be human, the human condition is to live a life that's nasty, Brutus, and short. This is humans in the state of nature. Or Shakespeare, when Shakespeare has the character of Hamlet ask this question, to be or not to be, whether to exist or not. Again, this is the question of whether suicide is the right reaction to the human condition. These are all posed in a world in which religion does not provide ready-made answers. So none of these issues, none of these folks could have written in this way in Dante's time or previously. Now, what I want to do is again reflect on your lives, because existentialism is not just an abstract theoretical perspective. It's not a philosophy where we just talk about the theories and then in a completely detached way. Wondering what the meaning of the human condition is and how we should lead our lives it's an inherently personal thing. And you can't just answer that question without thinking, how should I lead my life? So sometimes philosophical issues can be considered in a totally abstract way. Existentialism is not like that. You have to figure out what is the right way for you to live your life. Existentialism, in that sense, is a deeply pragmatic or practical philosophical perspective. We want to answer the question, what is it, how should we live our lives so that we can actually live them in an authentic or positive way? A distinction that's helpful in this is the descriptive versus normative distinction, because uh, a detached perspective can just be asking questions like, what is guiding my decisions? This is about what is or is not the case. The normative has to do with what ought to or should be the case. And existentialism is deeply concerned with these normative questions. How ought I guide my life? How ought I make my major life decisions? What are the things that and the values that guide me fundamentally? Those are the things that existentialism is concerned with. And it's concerned with them living in a secular society in which religion does not provide the ready-made answers already for us. Instead, what we're confronted by is a whole set of choices that Dante didn't even face. Choices like this. I guess the supermarket shelves don't look like this all the time, like when everybody makes a rush on collecting toilet paper. But we are burdened by a consumerist culture in today's world, which Dante couldn't even possibly fathom. We have to make decisions in which we're surrounded by so many brands. How can we even live as individuals? How can we be authentic anymore when we are just manipulated by corporate forces constantly? And whenever we try to express ourselves authentically, all we can do is make a decision from wearing one brand versus another. How can any of that ever be authentic? So the types of existentialist questions we face today in a secular consumerist society, that's the kind of things that the existentialists in this specific period were speaking to. What else makes this what else characterizes the way in which these questions confront us today? Well, think about living with our cell phones constantly in our pockets. We are inundated with influences, not just by market forces, but by news feeds. We're inundated by information everywhere. And this inhibits our ability to live authentically because it seems like, everybody knows all the same music now. Everybody watches all the same videos online. There's been a kind of genericization of culture around the globe. And this fundamentally reshapes the existentialist questions that confront us, even different from people 100 years ago, let alone people from 500 years ago, like Dante was. Now, sometimes this obsession with cell phones is considered like a problem of the youth, but it's actually true that adults, older people have actually used cell phones too. So it's not the case that cell phones are just making the human condition difficult for young people. In fact, the cell phone use is correlated with increased rates of depression across all age groups. So what's really fascinating is since the advent of the smartphone, like the first generation iPhone, rates of depression have been slowly creeping up. Here's just a really quick graph of the last few years. And this isn't just among teenagers or young people. Rates of depression have been increasing for everybody. Everybody is surrounded by this constantly online connected culture. And this fundamentally makes it difficult for us to find meanings in our lives. I take it that the increase in rates of depression precisely reflects the difficulty that we face, the existential crisis that we're in today. Now, that doesn't mean that when we look at these philosophers from 100 years ago, like Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, that they have nothing to say about this. In fact, what's really fascinating is Kierkegaard realized existentialism is deeply historically conditioned. So no philosopher could answer the question, what is the human condition for me now? Because every new generation must answer these questions. That's why existentialism never dies. That's why Gilgamesh or the ancient Egyptians couldn't have figured out what the nature of the human condition is, and we just have to read their works and know it. We have to think about how the struggle for meaning in human lives is constantly conditioned by our changing historical circumstances. So for Kierkegaard would precisely say, yes, listen to what I think the fundamental nature of the human condition is, but you have to reflect on your own self and see if that rings true with you. Does this provide a conception of authenticity that you think you can live by? Because how can we possibly be authentic when we live in this culture in which authenticity is now a commodity? So social influencers who have increasingly taken endorsements and and become manipulators in another part of the advertising corporate machine now have commodified authenticity, and social influencers do things to look authentic. But doesn't that just precisely create a kind of generic authenticity? This is just illustrates how difficult it is to be an authentic individual in today's society. In fact, it's so hard. I was amazed. I was struck by this news item that I saw where a man was really angry because there was a piece published that said that all hipsters look alike, and there was a photo that was published along with the article, and the man was mad because he thought that they had taken the picture of him and didn't get his permission. But it wasn't him. This is the tragic thing. I mean, it's so hilarious and so sad at the exact same time. He was arguing that the piece was fundamentally mistaken. It's not true that all hipsters look alike, but he proved the point of the piece because it wasn't actually him. It was some other person who was in the photo. So what this shows is it is almost impossible to live authentically in today's society. This is why we need to think about these existentialist positions all the more, so we can try to find answers to them. Because even if we want to react against this mass consumerist global society in which we live, we're going to try to become unconventional and nonconformists. But how can we escape it? We just start becoming nonconventional nonconformists in the exact same way. So it's so devilishly difficult. Now, we're also inundated by answers in popular culture. So there is no shortage of self-help books which are going to tell you how you ought to live your life. And I love this title, "You Are a Badass." This is like the quick answer. This is, in some ways, these are all works of pop existentialism. But Kierkegaard as well, hundreds of years ago, far before the consumer culture of today, he already anticipated these ideas, because Kierkegaard said, even then, you need to be deeply suspicious of cheap answers. So what I think of as this self-help genre is a really bunch of cheap solutions. They can often, it's like The Secret that can be summarized in just a couple of words. Anything that is so cheap is going to be worthless. Kierkegaard already saw this. In fact, finding meaning to human life is something that's deep and difficult, and there are no shortcuts for it. That's why he has this other amazing line. So this is from Kierkegaard's work, which we're going to read in this class. "Only one who works to get bread" is a metaphor for how difficult it is to actually give your life meaning. If you try to look for cheap solutions, then you're not going to fundamentally create authentic meaning in your life. You have to work hard at it. So the bread is like the payoff, and only if you work hard at it are you gonna get something from it. And it won't be easy. It might be a lot of anguish. So Kierkegaard's work that we read in this class, Fear and Trembling, is all about a couple of passages from the Bible about the story of Abraham and Isaac. And according to Kierkegaard, this is actually a deeply troubling story. And so if you think about what Christianity is telling you and what it means, or Judaism, any of these Abrahamic religions, there is something deeply troubling about it. So if religion doesn't make you sleepless, doesn't keep you up at night, regardless of what you believe, then you're not actually taking it seriously. So Kierkegaard thinks there are no shortcuts, and that finding meaning in our lives is deeply difficult and troubling. So reflecting on this, the answers to this question, what gives our lives meaning in the face of this threat of secular meaninglessness, that is really how existentialism in this modern period came about. And I trace it roughly, I trace this historical period of philosophy basically from Kierkegaard up through the famous French existentialists like Sartre and Camus. It's sort of that historical period is the stuff that we're going to focus on the most in this class. So in this sense, this is answer number 2. It's not just a general question about the human condition or the meaning of life. Existentialism for us in this class is going to be asking these questions from a practical perspective, where we actually want to figure out how to live our lives, not just how would one live one's life. And additionally, in light of the fact that religion can't provide a ready-made answer for us, Kierkegaard actually thinks religion does provide the answer, but it's a difficult one, and we have to struggle It's a deep struggle to figure out how Christianity for Kierkegaard can provide meaning in your life in that way. Kierkegaard was quite aware of the difficulties of secular society and the barriers that puts up in front of us. Now, in order to make this practical, this is what I want you to start thinking about. We're going to have several different ways of thinking dimensions of meaning. So one dimension is like the spiritual and religious versus the natural or atheistic. You can decide where along that line you think you are located now. A very different dimension is whether or not you think finding meaning has to do with your social relations, or whether or not finding meaning is fundamentally, inherently an individualistic pursuit. And these dimensions are really quite different from each other. So you can locate yourself now, a little exercise, figure out where in this conceptual space you want to locate yourself. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on 4 philosophers who locate themselves in very different ways in this conceptual space. And they're going to provide sort of reference points for us. And the reference points are going to help you decide how you want to live your life and how you can do that authentically. So we're going to read Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Simone de Beauvoir. Those are going to be the 4 main philosophers that we focus on. And we're also going to pair them with a bunch of films. So there's this wonderful era of filmmaking, the French New Wave, which was films exactly in the era of Beauvoir's France. So Beauvoir, Camus, and Sartre were writing all about the same time in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s in France. And this movement, the French New Wave, was a bunch of really innovative filmmakers who were making movies engaging with these very same philosophical questions. So for me, I don't have a narrow view of philosophy, that philosophy is just a bunch of texts and treatises. I think philosophy can be done by any type of popular culture. If it's engaging with certain questions about the human condition, then these films can be philosophical texts about existentialism. And in this era of the French New Wave, there was such a sustained interest in some of these very similar questions which were being debated in French philosophy, that I think this is like an amazing era of French existentialist thought in the medium of video, or in the medium of movies. So some of the films we're going to look at are films from this French New Wave. We're also going to look at in this class a bunch of other films, more modern stuff that I think engages with the exact same issues. Camus said that a novel is just like philosophy put into images. I mean, if that's true of novels, then all the more so it's true of these movies that put philosophical perspectives into images. So we're going to take in this class movies seriously as philosophical texts and look at the existentialist views that they put forth. So that's a rough game plan for the rest of the quarter. We're going to focus on 4 philosophers and read texts from each of them. We're going to also focus on a dozen films or TV shows. And we're going to look at the existentialist views that are put forth in those works of fiction and literature and movies, and compare them with the views put forth by these 4 philosophers. And of course, the ultimate goal is for you to figure out how you can live your life authentically from a practical perspective. Okay, thanks.